Almost nobody produces enough vitamin D, so almost everybody is deficient. As a side note, an interesting fact, 90% of people who have died from COVID have a vitamin D deficiency.
Wow.
90%.
Today I have not only a guy who's I consider very, very brilliant, but he also is a client of ours. He's becoming a good friend. He is a family man. He practices what he preaches, and he's an overall good dude. So in the simplistic terms, that's what I would say about our guest today. In the planned presentation, the specific intro, you have to sit through me reading this, and then we'll really get into the fun stuff. So Michael J. Breus, PhD, is a clinical psychologist and both a diplomat of the American Board of Sleep Medicine and a fellow of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. He is one of only 168 psychologists in the world to have passed the Sleep Medical Specialty Board without going to medical school. Dr. Breus was recently named the top sleep specialist in California by Reader's Digest and one of the top 10 most influential people in sleep. Dr. Breus is on the clinical advisory board of the Dr. Oz Show and has been on the show 40 times. Dr. Breus is the author of The Power of When, which was a #1 bestseller at Amazon for time management and happiness. The Power of When is a biohacking guide proving that there is a perfect time to do everything based on your genetic biological chronotype. And we're going to get into what chronotype is today. Dr. Breus gives the reader the exact perfect time to have sex, sleep, run a mile, eat a cheeseburger, and the best time to perform your best at work, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with a fun fact. So first of all, welcome to today's show.
Thanks for having me, Robbie, and you got to start calling me Michael.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you know, when you've gone through all the stuff you have, my friend, you know, you earn the title of doctor, but I absolutely will call you Michael. If I slip up, please, I apologize. It's only...
Don't worry, I'll smack you through the Zoom.
virtual smack. So
Absolutely.
Let's start with, you know, before we really get into the meat of things, let's start with, do you have any great fun facts about sleep? What's like something that everyone finds super interesting?
So one of the things that people have always asked me about sleep is they always wonder about food and sleep. And one of the big things people ask me about is turkey. They're always like, yeah, I heard that turkey's got tryptophan in it and it'll make me fall asleep. And so sometimes before bed, I'll have a half a turkey sandwich and it really helps me out. So let's bust this myth right now.
Yeah.
So tryptophan is in turkey, but just so that you're aware, it's actually in almost all meats. It's in pork, it's in chicken, it's in turkey and things like that. You'd have to eat about a 42-pound turkey to get the amount of tryptophan that would be worthwhile to help you sleep. And tryptophan does not work well in the presence of protein. So even if you did, like even if it was Thanksgiving and you got college, boys there who can really eat, there's no way that they're going to actually get enough tryptophan. The reason, by the way, that we get so tired after Thanksgiving doesn't have to do with tryptophan. It's that our in-laws showed up at our house and drove us crazy. And we're so excited that they are finally gone that we lie on the couch and we finally fall asleep and relax. So that's definitely a fun fact about sleep. And also along those lines, remember something, everyone, that 8 hours is a myth. Not everybody needs 8 hours. I personally do not need 8 hours, and many people don't need 8 hours. And so another fun fact is, just like Kellogg's was the one who came up with breakfast is the most important meal of the day, somebody out there came up with the idea of 8 hours, and unfortunately, it's no longer accurate.
So I want to get into a deep dive of what is that number, but let's wrap it into the context of starting off with this perfect time to do everything, right? And
Absolutely.
How does an individual know what is that perfect time for them to do everything, and what is the significance of this? Like, how impactful is that? How much variation is there from one individual to another? And let's get into the subject of that.
So about going on 8 years ago, I had a patient, and she was tough. She came in and she was like, Dr. Breus, I'm not sleeping too well. I can't seem to fall asleep. And we tried everything, literally everything. And nothing worked. I failed miserably. And she came back in. We started talking more. And I was interviewing her. And she turned to me and she said, you know something, Dr. Breus? She says, I don't think I have a sleep problem. She said, I just sleep at the wrong time. I was like, well, what do you mean? And she was like, if I could go to bed at 12 o'clock and get up at 7:30 and then be at work at 10, I think I'd be perfect. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you do that? And she said, I got kids, I got, husband, and my boss won't let me do that, wouldn't let me come in late. And I was like, well, what if I called him? And so she was like, good luck. You can give him a call. He's not a particularly nice guy, number one. And number two, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get fired at the end of the week. I was like, okay, no pressure, right? So I called her boss and I said, all right, look, here's the situation. I want to change her coming to work time and leaving work time. Can she show up at work at 10 and leave at 6? And he was like, honestly, Dr. Breus, I'm going to fire her at the end of the week, so I really don't care. I was like, great, let's do this. I'm going to call you back on Friday. Let's talk before you fire her. He was like, no problem. So we instituted this idea. I call on Friday and talk to her boss. And this is what he said to me. I don't know what you did, but I have a new employee. He said, she's attentive at meetings. She's not falling asleep. She's productive. He was like, just by moving her schedule later in the day, she's the person that I hired to begin with. And then he turned to me and he said, can you evaluate some of my other employees? And so I knew I was onto something. So I came back to her and I said, you know what? I think you've got a problem with something called your chronotype. Now, for folks out there who've never heard of what a chronotype is, let me explain. So we all have this genetic thing going on inside our bodies that gives us certain times when we do certain things specific for sleep. Now, many of you may not have heard of the concept of chronotype, but you've actually heard about it before if you've ever been called an early bird or a night owl, right? So you know those folks that you know that are early birds, right? They like to get up at like 5:30 in the morning. Yeah. By the way, the only thing I hate more than mornings are morning people. They're so damn chipper in the morning. That is not the route that I like to take, but we all know those people, right? Turns out that's genetic. If you look in a particular spot in your DNA called the PER3 gene, there's what's called a polymorphism or a single nucleotide polymorphism, or it's called a SNP, which means there was a reversal of the two building blocks. Something kind of weird happening. It was a little weird variation. That particular variation can make somebody an early bird or can make somebody a night owl. Now, that in and of itself, I thought was kind of cool. And by the way, that was discovered about in the 70s. Then somebody came along and said, well, there's got to be some group of people that's in between early birds and night owls. We called them hummingbirds for a while, okay? Again, this whole bird analogy was sort of going on. And then I had this patient, and she had insomnia, but she had a weird form of insomnia that was pushing her later into the night. And so I started to look around and I discovered that there also was a genetic variation on a very similar gene that caused an insomnia. And so what I said to myself is, we're missing that fourth category. We got the early bird, we got the hummingbird, we got the night owl, but what about our problem sleeper? Where is that person? And so my contribution to the literature in my third book, which was called The Power of When, was that I identified a fourth chronotype. Now, to be fair, Robbie, I'm not a bird, I'm a mammal. I don't really relate to birds. And so I wanted to choose animals to represent the different chronotypes, okay? So I'm sitting in this marketing meeting and we're talking about these four different things: early birds, hummingbirds, night owls, and insomniacs. And I said, I want to use animals because I'm a mammal. You know what we learned very quickly? You have to choose animals that people want to aspire to. Turns out nobody wants to be a porcupine. Nobody wants to be, a platypus. But we did choose animals that actually have this chronotypical schedule. So lions take the place of early birds. We also learned quite a bit of personality characteristics about lions. So I wanted to tell everybody who these people are. So lions represent approximately 10 to 15% of the population. These are my early morning risers. So these are people getting up at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. And they are great COOs. These are the people who like to manage companies. They like to make a list every day and go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. Kind of militant in their thinking, very structured in their thinking. And a lot of people turn to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I wish I was a lion, Michael. And I always say, why? Why do you want to be a lion? They say, oh my God, I could get up early. I can get so much stuff done. I could be sending emails early in the morning. Let me be clear. While there are some advantages to being a lion, one of them is not being social. These people have been up since 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. They can't, dinner and the movie is out for a lion, right? They never get there, you know? And so there's trade-offs there, right? In the middle, what we used to call a hummingbird, we now call them a bear. Being a bear is the best, by the way. If you're going to be something, you want to be a bear. By the way, if people are wondering what their chronotype is, if you just go to www.chronoquiz.com, chronoquiz.com, you can actually in 2 minutes figure out exactly what your chronotype is for free. I send you a whole thing. It's actually super cool. So bears are the best. Why is it best to be a bear? To believe it or not, 50%, 1 in 2 people is a bear. Well, it turns out that's the best one to be because bears follow the 9 to 5 schedule. They wake up around 7:30, they get to work at 9, they're done with work at 5, they go to bed around 10:30. This is a very average, normal, in-between schedule, all right? And why is it so great to be a bear? Honestly, everybody works on a bear schedule. So for early birds, it might not be so bad waking up early, but when we get to night owls, it's not so much fun being a night owl, right? But much better to be a bear, again, because of this bear schedule. What do we know personality-wise about bears? Quite a bit. Bears make up such a large percentage of the population. They have a tendency to be some of our extroverts, lots of fun. These are the folks that get the work done. If you're at a bar, they're the people that say, hey, come on over, let me buy you a drink, or they invite you to their home for dinner. They're a very gregarious group of people, and I enjoy spending quite a bit of time with bears.
So the time that someone wakes up and the time, because I'm hearing you say schedule, but then I'm hearing these personality traits. So
Yeah.
these genes and our sleep, or going to bed and waking up cycle actually affects some personality traits.
Exactly.
Wow. Huh.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Isn't it fascinating? It's so fascinating. This work is so cool. So the third group are what we call wolves, and those are the night owls. That's me. I am a night owl. I am a wolf. You heard me say before, I don't go to bed until midnight, right? And so that automatically puts me into that wolfish category. Now, I've always been this way ever since I was a teenager. And, you know, many of your listeners probably would identify with that as well. I mean, come on, all of us as teenagers, what do we want to do? We want to stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning and sleep until 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
Unfortunately for me, my body didn't change when I got to be an adult. I still want to do those things. I still want to stay up late and potentially sleep late. So that makes me a wolf or a night owl. Now, here's some interesting statistics about wolves that we've been learning now. Night owls have a tendency to be high risk takers. They have a tendency to be high cannabis users, people who have problems with medical situations. So these are people who consume more medication and have more depression, more loneliness, all of these different things. However, it's pretty damn cool to be a wolf like me, and I'll tell you why. These are where we find most of our creatives. So this is where we find our actors and our artists and our authors and our musicians, and all of those types of people have a tendency to be night people. Now, to be clear, you can be an artist or an actor or an author and get up super early in the morning or even have a bear's schedule, but the preponderance of them have a tendency to be late night creatives like myself. We have a tendency to be very loyal friends. We don't usually show up at the party until 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night because that's kind of when things are, get going for us. And we make up about 15% of the population. The final one are dolphins. So it's kind of interesting. By the way, lions get up very, very early. Their first kill is before dawn. So that's how we know that they're early birds. Bears wake up with the sun, just like all of us do. Wolves are nocturnal creatures. They actually kill at night. So that's kind of how we chose wolves. And then for the insomniacs, we chose dolphins. Now you might be wondering, Michael, dolphins, really? Why? So it turns out that dolphins sleep unihemispherically. So half of their brain is asleep while the other half is awake and looking for predators. And I always thought, that feels like somebody's got insomnia, right? They're never quite asleep. They're always kind of here, kind of there. So I thought that would be good. And plus, nobody seems to mind being a dolphin. Now, dolphins are really the group that I wrote the book for. And these people are a lot like the lions, except they've got a decent amount of anxiety. Sometimes to the point where they have obsessive compulsive disorder, or at least some of those characteristics of that OCD nature. So high anxiety, high organization, that kind of thing. Super intelligent people love to get up early, but sometimes their OCD just kind of throws them off so much that they never can quite finish a project. They're constantly saying, I need to work more. Meanwhile, when everybody else looks at them, they think it's amazing the stuff that they've done. But internally, that audio engineer in their head is constantly telling them, you need to do more, you need to push harder, you need to do this. So that's one of the things that we address with them in terms of their sleep schedule. And they have a tendency to have the most erratic sleep schedule out there. So what's fascinating is if you go to chronoquiz.com, you end up in one of these 4 categories. Now, some people have argued that how could you only pick 4? Turns out almost everybody seems to fit into these 4 categories. However, there are hybrids. Kind of an interesting thing. So we've had over 2 million people take the quiz at this point. So we're learning a lot about the statistics of it and really being able to utilize it in a very profound way. What we've discovered is, in fact, many people, they kind of understand it and they kind of don't. And they wonder, could I be a hybrid? Could I not? If you take the quiz, I'll send you an article to help you know and identify if you are a hybrid. And many people take the quiz more than once. Here's a kind of a quick hint. Look at your parents. Both of my parents, I remember when I was 10 years old, I could walk into my parents' bedroom at 11 o'clock at night. They'd both be wide awake. The lights would be on. They'd be reading or watching TV. They were both night owls. So it wasn't particularly surprising that I ended up being a night owl. What's interesting though, Robbie, is, and I think you've actually met my wife before, is my wife is also a night owl. I've always wondered, why doesn't Match.com ask these questions, right? Right? Wouldn't you want to know?
Yeah.
So it's so funny because when I first met my wife, she was like, hey, let's go out, to dinner. So I'd pick her up at 8, get to the restaurant at 8:30, be finished by 9:30, 10 o'clock, go to the movies, out at midnight, go get a drink, home by 1:30. And that was a normal night for us because we're both night owls. And we never even thought about it or even knew it, but it worked really, really well because also we have similar personalities. So it's very interesting when you start to look at these types of characteristics and then start to plot out other things that are going on. Because here's the most amazing part about the entire book and the discovery is once you know your genetic sleep schedule, whether you're a lion, a bear, a wolf, or a dolphin, you actually know the perfect time of day to do 50 different activities other than sleep.
Wow. And that
super cool.
And that all comes as part of the quiz and the feedback structure that you have?
Absolutely. So you take the quiz and you get a report that comes back. And not only do I teach you which chronotype you are, what time to go to bed and what time to wake up, but I show you the perfect time of day to drink caffeine. I show you the perfect time of day for exercise. And while I don't show you the perfect time of day to have sex, we are going to talk about it here on the podcast.
So can people can they switch their chronotype and then get rid of some of the negatives?
I know, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't, right? So it's genetic, right? And so, so everybody out there should know that Robbie is actually my fitness doctor and he's taking care of me right now. And, it would be great if I could dunk a basketball. I'm 5'9" and I have a certain amount of muscle mass. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to happen due to my genetics. And so the same thing kind of holds true with your sleep animal. It's your genetic predetermination. I wish I could tell you that you could change it, but what's interesting is all of us go through all of them at certain points in our lives. So think about it like this. If you have an itty bitty baby, what are they? They're probably a lion. They go to bed really early. They wake up really early, right? Very similar schedule. Once you get a child who's kind of moving into the toddler school age range, they become a bear. They go to bed at 7 o'clock. They get up at 7 o'clock. It seems to work out pretty well. Then they hit high school. What happens in high school? They want to go to bed late and they want to stay up late. So guess what? They become a wolf at that point in time. Right around age 20 or so, it seems to even out. And your body, based on your genetics, is going to pick one of these 4 different chronotypes, right? At that point in time, that's kind of what you're working with, but not as long as you might imagine. Right around age 50, 55, which is where I am, what we discover is melatonin production begins to slow down and begins to come a little earlier in the night. This then changes your chronotype and you move one earlier. So if you were a bear, you become a lion. If you were a wolf, you might become a bear. If you were a dolphin, you might become a lion. So it's very interesting to see that there are some age-related changes, which does have to do with melatonin, overall melatonin production, to understand the validity of these things. So you can move back and forth. Not on purpose, but just as your body grows and develops. Now, one thing that you could do is you could use light and melatonin and shift your chronotype. Unfortunately, you'd have to do it every single day. You'd have to actually shift, you'd have to take melatonin at night, and you'd have to use light therapy in the morning to move your chronotype to your typical thing that you are looking for in order to do that. To be fair, Robbie, a lot of people ask me to help them do this. A lot of people ask me to help them get up earlier in the morning so that way they can get up earlier. To be fair, it's really not what your body was designed to do. And so oftentimes I'm educating people and saying, look, we have this genetic predisposition. I wish I could dunk a basketball. Unfortunately, it's probably never going to happen without a trampoline. Okay. But I get it. I know what my limitations are. I know what my parameters are. The same holds true with sleep. We all have a genetically predetermined sleep schedule. By the way, if you're wondering what it is, you could also go and look on 23andMe or on Ancestry.com. Believe it or not, 23andMe has a morningness, eveningness report that you can learn about the lion or the wolf. Unfortunately, they don't delineate it out into all of the other ones. But again, this is a genetically predetermined scenario. So it will change over time with age, and you can manipulate it, but unfortunately, you're always going to pop back to what you were.
Very interesting. So, wow. So if someone wants to become a lion, you could actually take melatonin earlier and then
Correct.
basically get yourself into the sun in the morning, correct? That's really what you want, at least
Right.
10 minutes of direct sunlight exposure. That's one of the best ways.
Absolutely. So when you look at changing somebody's circadian rhythm, there are really 3, maybe 4 things that you can do to change their rhythm. One is use melatonin. Now let's talk for a second about melatonin, right? So number one, melatonin is a hormone. It is not a supplement. It's not an herb. It's not a vitamin. It's a hormone. Okay. So number one, you couldn't just walk down to the local GNC and buy testosterone or estrogen for a reason. Unfortunately, melatonin slipped under the FDA's guidelines and is a hormone. So it's something that you need to be careful with when you're using it. 99% of people have plenty of melatonin in their brain. Okay. Very, very few people have a melatonin deficiency. Is it measurable? Of course it is. You can do it with saliva, urine, or blood. You can have your melatonin measured. But when would you do that? You want to do it at night, so you know what your melatonin levels are at night, right? Because remember, we're talking about a circadian rhythm, and melatonin is going to spike at sometimes and be down at sometimes. You would want to measure your melatonin around 10 o'clock at night, which would be the time that it should be at its highest peak, to make sure that you've got enough on board to be able to help with sleep. Let's say that you decided, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do the testing, but I think I want to try melatonin to move my schedule around a little bit. Unfortunately, 95% of melatonin is sold in an overdosage format. The appropriate dose is between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. Most of it is sold in 3, 5, and 10 milligram dosages, which is a real problem because many people don't know that that's not the right dose. And so the number one side effect that I hear from my patients about melatonin is crazy dreams. This is, by the way, the exact side effect that we see from overdosage of melatonin. So if you've experienced this by taking melatonin and have some crazy dreams, please lower that dose. Again, adult dosage between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. People always want to ask me questions about melatonin for children. I am not a proponent of melatonin for children. Again, it's a hormone, right? And so we don't actually know how it could have an effect on, for example, a young female reproductive system. Many people don't know this, but at high dosages, for example, in Germany, melatonin at high dosages is used as a contraceptive. Yes, I did say that, as a birth control methodology. Wow. So why on earth would you give 3, 5, 10 milligrams to a 6-year-old little girl who is having a difficult time sleeping? That seems like a really stupid idea to me. So I say no melatonin in children. There is a caveat. Children who are on the autism spectrum, there's been a great amount of data to show that, and these are high dosages, 3 to 5 milligrams for many of these children is very, very helpful. Again, children on the autism spectrum seem to do very well with high dosages of melatonin. Not on the spectrum, I don't recommend melatonin. And I'll tell you why. Most kids can fall asleep on their own. Most kids can do, if you just put them on a schedule, you'd find that it works out very, very well. So again, looking at melatonin, we need to be careful. The other problem with melatonin, unfortunately, Robbie, there was a study done about a year ago where they pulled 15 bottles of melatonin off the shelf, all different brands. Not one of them, not one had an accurate amount in the capsule. So again, buyer beware, you need to know what you're getting your hands on. I personally use a melatonin called herbatonin. It's actually 100% organic, and it's created from seagrass. I love it. It's very effective. We'll get you a link that we can put into the show notes for people if they want it. But herbatonin is the one that I have a tendency to use, and I use with my patients as well. The other things that we get, go ahead.
So it's like this is a plant identical
plant-based melatonin.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Remember, melatonin occurs in all living creatures, and it is an antioxidant. So we find melatonin in tart cherry juice. We find it in seagrass, things of that nature. So it's not an uncommon thing to find melatonin to be extracted from food products. In fact, you probably want that because historically you don't want it, like, for example, harvested from cow brains, right, or created synthetically. Some of the synthetic melatonin that's created actually uses cow vomit as an accelerant. Wow. For the process. I know. So it's like you want to be careful about thinking through this idea of melatonin. Yeah. And again, one thing that I want to be very clear on is melatonin is not a sleep initiator. It's a sleep regulator. Okay. Melatonin changes when your body wants to sleep within a 24-hour cycle. It does not make you sleepy. Those are two completely different processes in the brain. Sleep drive is all due to the buildup of something called adenosine. So when a cell eats a piece of glucose, something comes out in the back end. One of those things is adenosine. Kind of works its way through the brain, and as it accumulates in your brain, you get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. That is the mechanism by which we fall asleep. However, our circadian rhythm, which is the thing that I wrote the book so much about, identifying these 4 known circadian rhythms in people, that is where it tells us when to go to bed. And when turns out to be an incredibly, incredibly important process.
So let's talk about circadian rhythm in the most simplistic form. And so circadian rhythm is basically the cycle of when all things happen in the body, when you wake up. And for a male, the testosterone is highest at 7 a.m. and then cortisol starts to spike right at 10 a.m. Or is this correct? And then you're building up sleep debt, and ideally you should process glucose the best in your wake cycle. But when you don't sleep well, then you don't process glucose because the wake cycle, because the body thinks it's the sleep cycle. So it's all this science of when the things happen in the body is really the circadian rhythm, correct?
Yeah, and so it's about the circadian rhythm of hormones. So as an example, all circadian rhythms start with your sleep circadian rhythm, which is why I started with it. So let's take the lions as an example, our early people, and let's compare them to the wolves, our late night folks, right? So here's what we know as an example. When a lion wakes up, they wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning because their melatonin faucet switched off, okay? As a wolf, my melatonin faucet doesn't switch off until 7 o'clock. Okay, so there's a difference there. We think there's somewhere between a 90-minute and 3-hour difference, depending upon which chronotype you are, right? So everything still happens, but it happens either advanced or delayed, which means if you know what your chronotype is, you can predict during the daytime when your cortisol is up so that you can be more focused, when your serotonin is up so you can be more calm and creative, when your adrenaline is up so you can go for a run or push some more weight, because it'll happen naturally. And that's the coolest part about the book, The Power of When, because what you do is you pick when you want to do an activity, because we know that your hormones are at a particularly optimal level based on your chronotype.
So really what people should do is go and take the quiz and then buy the book. Yeah. Because then when you hear about your chronotype, then you're going to really be dialed into the book and get even more direct information.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we give very specific times. Like I tell you exactly what time of day to have sex. I tell you exactly what time of day to work out. I tell you, when to eat a cheeseburger, when to ask your boss for a raise, you name it.
Awesome, awesome. And so melatonin is a lot like water in the ocean, and then you have waves. So just because there's a wave doesn't mean now there's more water in the ocean. It's just that's where the spike of the water is coming.
I love that analogy. That makes perfect sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when people look at things like melatonin and we look at things like chronotype, sometimes, to give a little bit more explanation of circadian rhythm, we can think about that in other ways, not just sleep, right? So how about hunger? We've got a circadian rhythm for hunger, right? People get hungry around breakfast time, around lunchtime, and around dinner time. That's a perfect example of a bodily function that runs on a circadian rhythm. Believe it or not, Robbie, we have over 300 circadian rhythms in our bodies going on throughout a 24-hour cycle. So there's lots of stuff to choose from for sure.
If someone's going to take melatonin, an adult is going to take melatonin, what's so for example, one thing I've heard is like pilots and flight attendants that are flying from here to Europe or something. And now they're in an 8 different hour time zone, 10 hour different time zone. So they're like they did some research and found out, and I don't know how true this is. You'll be able to tell me, but like you should take melatonin 5 hours before you're supposed to fall asleep. Is that true? And what is
No,
true?
that's completely wrong. Okay. So number one, I've been very fortunate. And full disclosure, I work with a company called Time Shifter, Timeshifter. And we have developed an algorithm for jet lag, which is pretty cool. And it uses melatonin, caffeine, light, and napping in a particular order to be able to get you there. So when we're talking about people like pilots, talking about travel, things of that nature, all of us can experience what's called jet lag. So jet lag is where our brain is in one time zone and our body is in another, right? So with the advance of rapid transportation, all of a sudden our bodies can be hundreds and hundreds of miles past time zones, and our brain, we don't have a switch to go click me to central time zone, click me to eastern time zone. It doesn't really work that way. But the good news is that our bodies will naturally adapt one time zone per day. Unfortunately, when you go to cross 12 time zones, you don't want to wait 12 days. This is where the idea of using melatonin can be very, very helpful. And so for many of my patients, what we do is we use melatonin 90 minutes before we want them to go to sleep. So we would calculate what your bedtime would be in Europe, depending upon when you land, right? And we would keep all of these things into consideration. Here's the good news. It's all in an app. So if people just go to the App Store and you download Time Shifter, you can actually use the code The Sleep Doctor and get your first 2 jet lag plans for free. But it's super duper cool. And use of melatonin in the evenings when you're not traveling, I would say approximately 90 minutes before bed. That's how long it takes plasma concentration levels for melatonin to reach the height that we need it to. And again, be careful about the dosage. You really want to keep the dosage low. Otherwise, you could experience grogginess the next day or difficulty waking up.
And so you want the melatonin to be at the biggest spike at the time you go to sleep.
Right? Exactly, because that would mimic what happens at night, right? Because our melatonin seems to spike around 10:30 at night for the bears out there. For the wolves like me, my melatonin doesn't spike until midnight. But for the lions, melatonin probably spikes around 9:30, 10 o'clock.
So we have your basically is your genetic code what sleep or circadian rhythm you're going to be in and how your chronotype is. Melatonin can be great, but not for most children unless they have autism. If you're going to use melatonin, it should be 90 minutes before bed, and it should be a half to 1.5 milligrams.
Exactly.
And the best place to get a good quality melatonin is from Herbitone, correct?
You got it. Herbitonin. And people also ask me about some other supplements, so I could tell you a little bit about some of those. The 2 things that I look for people that really are more vitamins and minerals is vitamin D and magnesium. So the very first thing that I do for every single client that comes through my door is I run blood work looking at their vitamin D and their magnesium. And I'll tell you why. So vitamin D is a circadian pacemaker. Number one, it's an alerting agent. I take 10,000 international units every single morning. It absolutely wakes me up. I can tell you for sure, if I don't take it, I feel a difference. Also, vitamin D is something that is produced in the sun. Almost nobody produces enough vitamin D, so almost everybody is deficient. As a side note, an interesting fact, 90% of people who have died from COVID have a vitamin D deficiency.
Wow.
90%. Okay, so do
Wow.
yourself a favor.
Say that again. That's worth restating.
90% of people who have currently died from COVID have a vitamin D deficiency.
Wow. Wow.
Fact.
Wow.
So I've been taking vitamin D for 4 or 5 years for my sleep. I take it every morning. It helps with my circadian pacing, and I recommend that you do. Now, remember, though, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so you may need to take it with some fat, maybe a slice of avocado or something like that in the mornings to be able to allow that to help absorb. Magnesium is a big one. I like magnesium in the evenings. Many people report that magnesium helps them feel a little bit more relaxed and a little bit calmer. I'm a big fan of magnesium for people, but I have a unique way of people getting it. So many people don't know, but bananas are loaded with magnesium. It turns out that the peel has got 3 times the amount of magnesium as the fruit itself. So I created a recipe called banana tea. So here's what you do is you take an organic banana and just wash it off. Cut off the tip and the stem, cut it in half, leave the peel on it and the fruit in it. So you have 2 halves of a banana with the peel. Drop it into 3 cups of boiling water. Boil it till the banana turns brown and then drink the water. It's loaded with magnesium. It tastes really good. My daughter says, Dad, it's very banana-y. So you really have to like the flavor. Right. Actually, Robbie, you know Carson, so you could see her saying that, I'm sure. But what's great about it is it doesn't interact with anything. You can give it to seniors, you can give it to children. You don't have to worry about interactions with medication, and it's a boatload of magnesium, and it really helps people chill out, which is great. So when you're looking for deficiencies, the very first, or you're not sleeping particularly well, the very first thing that I do is I want to make sure you got melatonin, I want to make sure you got vitamin D, and I want to make sure you got magnesium. And so those are really the 3 areas that I recommend for all people to really check out first. Once those are at par levels, if you're still not happy with your sleep or your sleep performance, that's when we can start to jump in and look at other things that can be maybe promote better sleep, right? So help reduce anxiety before bed, things of that nature.
So 10,000 IU a day, that's kind of a lot though, correct? That's
I mean, that's what I personally take. I recommend to most people 5,000 international units, but to be fair, during COVID, I increased my dosage.
Okay. And that
you should check with your doctor though, for sure.
Okay, and what time should that be taken?
I take it in the first thing in the morning, again, with some kind of a fat. So because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. And by the way, most people you really shouldn't call vitamin D a vitamin. It's actually a hormone.
Yeah. And then magnesium should be taken when?
And preferred in the evenings.
And how much?
And it depends.
Well, I guess, okay.
Well, it depends. About 200, somewhere between 250 and 350 milligrams seems to be about the right amount. I wrote an entire piece on magnesium on my blog. So if people go to the Sleep Doctor, doctors all spelled out.com, and you click on blogs, you can actually put in any single ingredient you can think of. And I've written anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 words about it. So I've got magnesium, L-theanine, GABA, magnolia bark, jujubaside, 5-HTP, valerian, hops, like literally you name it, and it's in there. So if you're thinking about, looking for maybe some help with sleep or an over-the-counter sleep aid or something like that, check the blog first and look up each one of the ingredients. I think you'll find that you'll start to understand a lot more.
Awesome. Very cool. So 250. So for magnesium, for vitamin D, around 5,000 IU. Check with your doctor. Magnesium, 250 to 350 milligrams in the evening.
In the evening.
Okay. So like any certain amount time before bed, or?
So you can take the banana tea about 30 minutes before bed. That seems to work really well. Now they've got magnesium in a powder. I saw one, it's called Calm. So people can get the powder and you just mix it in some water and you know, drink the water before bed. You don't want to drink a lot of water before bed because then it's going to make you have to pee.
Right.
So, you know, keep it down to like 6, 8 ounces type of thing and make sure you pee before you go to sleep.
Okay. How many milligrams can you get from the banana boiling in the water?
I would say one banana is probably about where you want to be. I have one mom, she puts 3 bananas in it and she makes a pitcher for the week and she pours it into popsicle molds and she gives it to her kids as a dessert. It works like a charm. It's awesome.
So very interesting. So a great pattern for people to start with is vitamin D, sun exposure, and right, and they want to have physical activity early in the morning, ideally as well, right?
Yeah, well, so I actually have a 5-step plan that I give people, and it doesn't cost a dime, and everybody who's listening can do it. So let me roll through it, and I'll give everybody all kinds of great info. So step number 1 has to do with pick one wake up time and stick to it. So I've already kind of given everybody a hint. Go to chronoquiz.com and figure out what your wake up time needs to be. The key here is actually that you do it both during the week as well as the weekends. So you've got to keep the exact same wake up time. Notice I didn't say bedtime. If you want to stay up late on Friday night, you want to stay up late on Saturday, that's your business. But if you get up at 6:30 during the week, I want your butt up at 6:30 on the weekends, right? Why on earth, Michael, would you want to do that? I'll tell you why. Consistency counts. So the more consistent we wake up, specifically at our chronotypical wake up time, all of our body's efficiencies come into play. What I can tell you with very degree of certainty is my weight dropped dramatically. I'm at 152 pounds now, and I was at 160 something long before. And just the consistency of my chronotype allows my body to act more efficiently and be able to roll through those calories in a much more efficient way. So for me, keeping that one consistent wake up time. Step number 1 is choose one wake up time and stick to it. Step number 2 has to do with caffeine. I'm not against caffeine, to be clear, but to be fair with you, caffeine has a half-life of between 6 and 8 hours. So I don't want you drinking it too close to bedtime. So step number 2 is to stop caffeine by 2 p.m. I choose 2 because of that half-life idea. So if you stop at 2, 8 hours later is 10, when most people are going to want to go to bed. So I figure in that case, that might make a lot of sense. Step number 3 has to do with alcohol. There's a really big difference between going to sleep and passing out, okay? We don't like the passing out. We like the going to sleep. But I don't mind having alcohol. I like wine. I like scotch. But I don't want to have it too close to bedtime. It turns out that the time from the last sip to lights out is the most important time when it comes to alcohol ingestion, when it has its effects on sleep. So one alcoholic beverage takes roughly 1 hour for an average human to digest. So this is my general rule as step number 3, is that you need to wait 3 hours after your last alcoholic beverage before you go to bed. So you have one drink, drink 1 glass of water, wait 1 hour. If you have 2 drinks, have 2 glasses of water, wait 2 hours. You really don't want to go more than 2 drinks, especially during dinner time, and I'll explain why. Number 1, for a lot of women, it has a tendency to energize them. That's not really what we're looking for here. We're trying to get people to relax. And for guys, they can become aggressive. Again, not something that we really need before going to bed. And quite honestly, if you need 3 drinks at dinner, you have bigger problems on your hand than sleep. So keep it to 2 and stop drinking alcohol 3 hours before bed. Step number 4 is our favorite: exercise, exercise, exercise. You want to exercise every single day. I would argue that one of the biggest problems that we're seeing now is the lack of movement. Remember, sleep is recovery. If you don't have anything to recover from, you ain't going to sleep so well, right? So move every day. A minimum of 20 minutes. Robbie's going to tell you it needs to be a lot more, and he's going to tell you exactly which ones to do. And I 100% agree with him because I am one of his students and I'm learning myself. But we don't want to exercise too close to bedtime. Why? Well, remember something. As we're going to bed, our core body temperature is getting at its lowest point in the day. If we exercise too close to that, it raises this core body temperature, which is not going to work out very well. So step number 4, exercise daily, but stop exercise roughly 4 hours before bed. This will allow your core body temperature to drop and allow you to fall asleep successfully. Last step has to do with morning times. So step number 5 is do these 3 things when you wake up in the morning. First thing you do is take 5 deep breaths. Why? We want to kick in your respiratory system. We want to get things going. We want to get some air, some oxygen functioning into your body. Step number 2 is you should have a glass of room temperature water sitting next to you in a refillable container, right? At least 15 ounces of water, drink it and drink it fast. Why? Most people don't know it, but sleep in and of itself is a dehydrative event. You lose almost a full liter of water every single night just from the humidity in your breath. So don't drink a cup of coffee in the morning, drink a glass of water in the morning, and you will be far better off. The final thing you want to do is exactly what you said, Robbie, is go outside and get 15 minutes of sunlight. Number 1, it helps with vitamin D, but more importantly, it turns off the melatonin faucet in your brain. Most people don't know, but sunlight hits your eyeball, and there's a particular cell in your eye called a melanopsin cell. This cell turns and sends a signal to the brain to turn off that melatonin faucet. That's perfect for the morning and helps get rid of brain fog. By the way, this is also the reason why we don't like blue light at night, because that also is telling our brain that it's morning time. So when we get up in the morning, we're going to take 5 deep breaths, right? We're going to drink 15 ounces of water, and we're going to get 15 minutes of sunlight. Do me a favor. If you walk outside, take off your shoes and put your feet on the earth. I don't have a whole lot of data to prove it, but I can tell you one thing. I do it most mornings and it feels good. It's called grounding. Again, I don't have a lot of specific data on it regards to sleep, but what I can tell you is that every single person that I talk to who does it loves it. And you know what? It feels good to put your feet on the earth. So just go ahead and do it. It'll be fun and you'll like it. And that's my 5 steps for better sleep.
That's awesome. Very cool. So to reiterate, keep wake up time the same every day. Caffeine, stop by 2 p.m. Have less than 1 drink per hour before bed. So give yourself per drink that you have at least 1 hour. Really no reason to have more.
Step number 3 is 3 hours before bed, stop alcohol.
And then that's 3. And then 4 is exercise, move every day, but stop exercise 4 hours before bed. And 5 is do 3 things in the morning. Breathe thoroughly, some good meditative breathing, and some good even stronger type of breathing, like fast in through your nose and even fast out through your nose. At least 15 ounces of water every day, and go outside and get at least 15 minutes of sunlight while walking on the earth. Michael, that is awesome information. I mean, the clarity, the background, what happens in our body is just, it's great. If you don't want to be helped, then you're not going to be helped. But if you take what Michael shared with you today and use it, I guarantee you it's going to make a profound difference in your life, the way you feel, your energy every day, the way you sleep. And let's not close out with the most interesting conversation about sex. So let's talk about circadian rhythm and sex and sleep and how we can improve that area of our life.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me on this show, and thank you for being my fitness doctor. You're amazing, and you're helping me in ways that I never could have gotten help from before. So I very much appreciate you. So let's talk about sex. All right. So everybody always wants to know, Michael, what's the best time for sex? And so let's talk about it for a second. So we did a survey, and what we discovered was that 74% of people have sex between 10:30 and 11:30 at night. Not a particularly big surprise. It's the evening, it's the end of the day, that kind of thing. You need 5 hormones to successfully have sex. You need estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, adrenaline, and cortisol all need to be raised, and you need melatonin to be low. Okay? Robbie, I'll give you one guess what your hormone profile looks like between 10:30 and 11:30 at night. Where's your melatonin?
Yeah, it's high. It's high.
High,
Yeah,
right? Where are all those other hormones? Low, right? So that's hint number 1 as to when people should be having sex. Hint number 2, what do most men wake up with in the morning?
An erection.
An erection, right? If that is not Mother Nature telling you when to use that damn thing, I don't know what is, right? So when you look at our testosterone, so it's all based on testosterone for men, right? So when you start to look at testosterone tables, what you'll notice is that we see a testosterone spike very early in the morning for men, which makes having sex a lot easier for men, especially for men who are getting older, who may have erectile dysfunction or things of that nature. You're going to be much more successful at having sex in the morning than you are in the evening. Right now, it's no longer not tonight I have a headache. It's not tonight I'm too damn tired, right? It's like people are exhausted at the end of the day, and there's so much stress going on and things like that.
Yep.
So it turns out that most people actually would do better having sex in the morning. Now, one of the things we talked about early in the podcast is we talked about me and my wife and how we wish that Match.com, knew and could match up night owls and early birds and things like that. Unfortunately, many, many people don't end up marrying or living with their chronotypical partner, right? The same chronotype. So what do you do if you're having sex and one person's a lion and the other person's a wolf? Like, how does that work? So here's the good news. If you bought the book, I created a matrix where you can put your chronotype across the top, your partner's chronotype across the bottom, and I give you an early evening and an early morning time where your hormones will be perfect for having sex with your partner. In addition, I created 2 more tables, one for homosexual couples and one for lesbian couples, because the hormone profiles are different. So anybody that wants to learn the best time to have sex, check out the book. I promise you, you'll learn more.
That's awesome. Very cool. Wow. What happens in females? What is there some other change of excitation for females in the morning as well that matches?
So what's interesting about that is the answer is yes. When we actually started to survey people based on their chronotype and then based on their gender and things like that. So when you look at it from a arousal standpoint, we know that libido for both men and women has a tendency to be much higher in the morning times. Some of that has to do with just pure exhaustion that's been relieved. Also, some of that has to do with the physical restoration that occurs during sleep, right? And so a lot of people require that. Turns out having sex in the morning is actually the best time to have sex. Here's the funniest part about the survey data is when we surveyed just men versus women, asking them what was their preference time to have sex, women reported almost exclusively morning times, and men reported whenever it was offered. I kid you not. It wasn't a joke. I kid you not. Every single man was like, whenever, right? It was really hilarious.
Right.
Then when you look at it by a chronotype, it was interesting. Lions absolutely liked early morning sex. Wolves, interestingly, the night owls like me, they actually would prefer early morning sex, but having stayed up all night, because they're night owls, right? That's kind of because early mornings for a wolf is not a performance time. So it was very, very interesting when you start to look at it. The chapter is not very long, but it gives a lot of great information. I think people will dig it.
That's awesome. Well, Michael, thank you very much for this wealth of information. And we'll look forward to the next episode where we dive even deeper into this subject that makes a profound difference in people's lives. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate you, and I'm excited to be one of your clients and to have the opportunity to be on this podcast. You guys rock. This is Dr. Michael Breus wishing all of you sweet dreams.
Go to theultimateyoupodcast.com to get the best exercise training in the world that will completely revolutionize your body, fix your aches, pains, and stiffness, and get you in the best shape of your life for free. You'll also find show notes from this episode.